Remembrance Day atrocity in Northern Ireland. A bomb has killed 11 and injured more than 60. It was planted a few yards from the War Memorial in Enniskillen. It went off without warning as the remembrance crowds were gathering. A building collapsed on top of them. 13 children are among the injured. The Queen is deeply shocked. She sent her heartfelt sympathy. The Prime Minister says the world will condemn it.
Is really desecrating the dead and a blot on mankind.
Good evening. Shortly before 11 o'clock this morning, as the nation was about to draw together for its annual act of remembrance, a bomb exploded near the War Memorial in Enniskillen, County Fermanagh. The crowd which had gathered there was given no warning. They were civilians, Catholic and Protestant, young and old, there with their wreaths to remember. The bomb killed 11 of them and injured 63. The dead included 3 married couples, a retired policeman, a caretaker and a nurse. Many of the injured are in a very serious condition. Of the 63 taken to hospital, 13 are children between the ages of 2 months and 15 years. So far, the IRA has said nothing, which is unusual. News of the explosion reached London just as the Queen was leading the Remembrance Day ceremony at the Cenotaph. She called the attack an atrocity. She said she was deeply shocked. The Prime Minister said it was utterly barbaric, an act of inhumanity against the living, of desecration against the dead. In Dublin, Charles Hockey, Prime Minister of the Irish Republic, said the culprits must be utterly repudiated and brought to justice. Archbishop Robin Eames, the head of the Church of Ireland, who was at the scene himself, said he wished those who'd planted the bomb could see what he had seen. Enniskillen is a town with a proud military tradition. It sent many soldiers to the battlefields of the First and Second World Wars. This morning the War Memorial was a solemn and silent place as people gathered there. At 10:45 the bomb went off in a hall a matter of yards away. The building collapsed on top of the waiting crowd. This evening, the Chief Constable of the RUC said the building had not been searched before the service. He said he was in no doubt the bomb was the work of the IRA. The scenes immediately after the bomb went off were recorded by a local man who was there with his home video camera for the ceremony. Our first report tonight is from Michael Sullivan.
At the very moment when they were to have been standing in their ranks in silence, remembering the dead of 2 world wars, soldiers in their ceremonial uniforms were scrabbling in the piles of fallen brickwork and masonry in Enniskillen's town centre, digging out the civilians who'd been buried in the explosion. The bomb exploded at 11:15 as the townspeople moved into place around the War Memorial, waiting quietly in the cold for the Remembrance Day ceremony to begin. They were pensioners, women and children, the respectful onlookers waiting for the soldiers and ex-servicemen to march into place, like hundreds of thousands of others in towns and villages all over Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The bomb had been hidden in an old school building, a familiar landmark only a few yards from the War Memorial. Whether it was timed or detonated by remote control has yet to be established, but it blew the building apart, filling the air with flying rubble which killed most of those who were buried and injured more than 60 others.
Hey! Get a load over here and carry them! Pass them over the rubble into the building!
Had the bomb gone off during the ceremony itself, the death toll would have been still greater, but young soldiers who'd been waiting in their ranks at a distance to march into place survived to join the rescue. The injured were taken to Enniskillen's Erne Hospital, the dead to a makeshift morgue in a local Territorial Army depot. During the day, the list of known dead slowly grew until it reached 11. The county of Fermanagh has suffered a high level of terrorist activity. The whole route of the Remembrance Parade had been searched, but the bombers had found a way of placing their explosives where no one thought to look and detonated them at a time when nobody really thought they would.
In terms of the number killed, today's explosion is the worst terrorist outrage in Northern Ireland for 5 years. The emergency services were strained to the limit. Hospitals in Enniskillen coped with a toll of injured which continued to rise for several hours as more people were taken for treatment. As doctors and nurses tried to help the injured, political and religious leaders in Northern Ireland spoke of their outrage and their sympathy for the people of Enniskillen. This report from Clive Ferguson.
Traffic was moving again through the centre of Enniskillen within hours of the explosion, a mark of just how accustomed the people of Northern Ireland are to the effects of terrorism, even on the scale of today's bombing, which brought death and injury to the town's remembrance ceremony.
Some people were thrown through the windows. We have a mahogany door. We've just recently put a new mahogany door on, and one woman was actually blown through that with the force of the blast and right through the mahogany door, which it shows how large it was.
Were you able to give her some assistance then?
Oh yes, we helped as many people as we could. People came into the house, people who were injured or people who were shocked. Generally, people didn't know what was happening. It was just such a shocking experience.
Those first reactions of shock and sorrow took little time to turn to bitterness and, for the local unionist MP, anger.
After 17 years, I wonder if government, I'm sure they'll be gracious to us when we go and make our representations. But that's not enough for the people in this community anymore. Surely with over 190 people now dead in this one constituency, the people of other constituencies in the United Kingdom can at least project themselves into the situation in which I find myself today. Project themselves into the situation where I will be going tomorrow to Westminster to talk about this atrocity. And surely they must ask themselves, what would we expect our elected Member of Parliament to do if this sort of thing occurred in our constituencies?
Of the many hurt in the blast, the majority were treated in Erne Hospital in Enniskillen. But others with more serious injuries were flown to Altnagelvin Hospital in Londonderry to be given more specialised treatment. The injured at Erne Hospital, among them several young children, were visited by the Church of Ireland primate who'd been due to take part in the Remembrance Day service.
Anybody, anywhere in the world, who had any doubts about the depths to which terrorism is prepared to stoop in Northern Ireland must be in no doubt now when they have seen what happened today in Enniskillen.
The IRA's political wing, Sinn Féin, are in the majority on the local council here. They boycott remembrance services. The council chairman gave his reaction to the explosion.
I express my sympathy, and have before, for IRA actions which have taken place where civilian people were injured and killed.
Will you condemn the actions?
I will wait and see who claims responsibility, if anybody claims responsibility for this act.
The Northern Ireland Secretary flew to Enniskillen from his constituency as soon as news of the explosion reached him. He was scathing in his condemnation.
If this is anybody's idea of the sort of incident that somehow advances their cause, then I don't think that any decent person needs any further reminder of what a thoroughly obscene and debased cause it must be if it requires the murder and maiming of old people and children, youth organisations, civilians, and others who serve in the security forces.
The leader of Ireland's Roman Catholics, Cardinal Tommaso Fee, said the bombing had been a most heinous crime, appalling in its brutality. And he said everyone connected with the attack was guilty of murder most terrible. John Hume, leader of the mainly Catholic SDLP, said it was the most provocative act ever committed against the Unionist people. And the Reverend Ian Paisley, leader of the Democratic Unionists, said the atrocity was sacrilege of the worst kind, committed by what he called hell-inspired monsters. The Prime Minister said she was stunned at the depth of callousness and inhumanity. It was so appalling, she said, she could scarcely believe it. She said today's attack should finally persuade people who'd supported the IRA that they were wrong and that the terrorists should have no hiding place in any country.
I hope, well, two things immediately. First, that everyone will concentrate their efforts on finding these people who've done it and bring them to justice. There should be no hiding place in any country for these people. And secondly, I hope that anyone the world over who's ever had any sympathy, however misplaced, for these, will not have any more now, because every nation should honor its dead and give the people who've lost their relatives and the people who appreciate what the dead did for us, we should all be able to stand and honor them in peace.
The Labour Party leader Neil Kinnock said the attack had shown a new depth of vicious cowardice. He called it an atrocity against ordinary people, honouring those who fought to get the very freedom terrorism wants to destroy. And internationally, an exceptional condemnation from the Soviet news agency TASS. They called it a barbaric act apparently committed by the IRA, and Soviet television showed pictures of the scenes in Enniskillen. This isn't the first time a bomb has exploded at a civilian target in the province without a warning being given. 5 years ago, 17 people were killed when a bomb went off at the Drop-In Well pub in Ballykelly. On that occasion, the INLA claimed responsibility.
The reasoning behind any terrorist outrage in Northern Ireland is always difficult to pinpoint, but this one, which is almost certainly the work of the IRA, is marked by its blatant civilian target and the fact that no warning was given. The timing of the attack coincides with the Provisionals under enormous pressure, first militarily. At Lochgall in May, soldiers shot dead 8 IRA men who were preparing to attack a police station. The Provisionals swore revenge. In all, 13 of their men have been killed this year, their worst losses since 1976. Then last weekend, on board this ship, the Exund, a huge haul of arms and ammunition was seized by the French. Part of the consignment, thousands of rifles with rockets and missiles, was destined for the IRA. On the political front, last weekend's Sinn Féin conference in Dublin faced a new, recently elected IRA Army Council, determined that their military attacks should not be overshadowed by the electoral effort to win seats on councils north of the border. The place of the attack, Enniskillen, which is close to the border with the Irish Republic, has always been an easy target for the Provisionals. Amidst the Fermanagh terrain, IRA members move often without detection. Here there have been regular displays of strength at Republican funerals, and the proximity to the border provides a ready escape route for terrorists. The consequence of today's attack is likely to be an intensified offensive against the Provisionals both north and south of the border. Irish Prime Minister Charles Haughey is now under enormous pressure to ratify an extradition agreement with Britain, an agreement which his government could have delayed because of his discontent over the progress of the Anglo-Irish Accord. Following the signing of that accord 2 years ago, Unionists were promised the sort of improved cross-border security cooperation which would help prevent attacks such as today's. Their case for more troops and police on the border will now be strengthened.
The Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, Sir John Herman, who admitted tonight that the building where the bomb was planted had not been searched, said he was satisfied the bomb had been intended to murder civilians. But he said even the terrorists must be shocked by the scale of the carnage. In Enniskillen tonight, ordinary people have been at a church service where prayers have been said for those who died this morning. We've just received this report from Belfast from our correspondent there, John Thorne. Well, I apologise. We're having difficulties with our lines to Belfast. The most senior Anglican churchman in Ireland is Robin Eames, who's the Archbishop of Armagh, the Primate of all Ireland for the Church of Ireland. This morning he was in Enniskillen preparing to preach a Remembrance Day service there. As we've seen, when the bomb went off, he went to the War Memorial. I'm hoping, but I believe we cannot join him now in our studio in Belfast. Let me instead tell you that there is an emergency number for people seeking news of relatives who may have been in Enniskillen this morning. The number is 0232, that's the code for Belfast, and the number 672298. That's 0232 672298. Now, we can go to Belfast, where we're joined by the Church of Ireland Archbishop of Armagh, the Most Reverend Robin Eames. He was in Enniskillen this morning. He went to the scene where the bomb went off. Archbishop, what does a senior churchman such as yourself, who has seen what you have seen today, say to your congregation and to the wider congregation which is listening tonight?
I don't think any church leader in Northern Ireland over the past few years has any doubt at all that those who perpetrate such things as we have seen in Enniskillen today are the slightest bit interested in what church leaders have to say to them. We know this. So what we are doing and what we must do is to make actions speak louder than words. And today in Enniskillen, the clergy of all denominations were working alongside those who had been injured. We were bringing comfort. We were trying to show compassion. We were trying to bring comfort to them. And that, to me, is far more important than ritualistic condemnation, because, as I've just said, we know people don't listen to those things now.
And yet at lunchtime today, Archbishop, you said that you wished that the people who had planted this bomb could have been there with you, seeing the sights that you witnessed at 11 o'clock today.
I honestly believe that it would have been a heart of stone that would not have been affected by what I saw today. To see parents desperately searching to see if their children were alive, to see a little girl guide covered in blood, searching for her parents. You don't see those things every day in Britain. You don't see those things every day on television. But today in Enniskillen, we saw those things, and if that doesn't affect people's minds and conscience, in God's name I've got to ask, what will affect it? This was the horror of a hospital, and I would pay tremendous tribute to the Erne Hospital today. Their performance, the way in which they went about their work and the way in which they coped with this emergency was simply magnificent. But at the end of the day, we were dealing with human tragedy, people who needed compassion and help. And I remember very well, and I'll always remember, the hand that reached out to me from one of the trolleys in one of the wards, and a voice simply said, "Do you know, Archbishop, we should have been in church by now." But after all, God's in this ward as well, isn't he? And it's at that point that I believe our compassion and our pastoral care has got to be seen.
Archbishop, it is impossible, of course, to look into the minds of the people who planted this bomb, but one might suppose that a part of their purpose is to provoke a retaliation. And indeed, tonight there is a report that 5 Catholic youths have been shot in Belfast. What would you say to the people of Northern Ireland who might perhaps be tempted to take retaliatory action?
The first part of your question, who knows the purpose of a bomb like the one in Enniskillen? I think it would be futile and foolish to try and speculate as to why it was done. So far as retaliation is concerned, Northern Ireland's history has shown that retaliation gets absolutely nothing except more heart-searching, more suffering, and more loss of life. And my appeal would be to the people of Northern Ireland to show the dignity and the courage that we know they have shown the world already, and to allow every effort to be made to bring to justice those who have done what they did in Enniskillen. That is the only way. If we play any other game, we're playing right into the hands of the perpetrators of Enniskillen, and that will be the end for us all.
Archbishop Robin Eames in Belfast, thank you very much indeed. In London, at the Remembrance Day ceremony at the Cenotaph, wreaths were laid by the Queen, 3 royal princes, and by politicians, unaware at that stage this morning of what had happened in Northern Ireland.
There was tight security in Whitehall, with electronic searches of war veterans and visitors, and police keeping a close watch on the crowd. The Queen led the procession to the Cenotaph. Watched from above by the Queen Mother, the Duchess of York, the Princess Royal, and the Princess of Wales. At 11 o'clock, the chimes of Big Ben signalled the start of 2-minute silence across the land. The silence was broken, as every year, with the sounding of the last post. Here, people remembered those who died in 2 world wars and other smaller conflicts. Walking forward to lay the first wreath, the Queen did not then know about the bomb in Enniskillen. Waiting behind her, the Prime Minister and other political leaders, Neil Kinnock, David Steele, and Ulster Unionist leader James Molyneux. After the ceremony, ex-servicemen and women passed the cenotaph to pay their respects, marching to the sound of famous wartime tunes.
Police in the Irish Republic say they're still no closer to finding the remaining members of the gang who kidnapped the Dublin dentist John O'Grady. One police source said they could now be anywhere in the country. Today's search was concentrated just south of Tipperary. Several hundred troops and police combed dense woodland, but apparently found no trace of the kidnappers. The Palestinian terrorist group Abu Nidal says it's hijacked a yacht off the Israeli coast and taken 8 hostages, 2 of them children. A spokesman for Abu Nidal made a rare appearance before newsmen in West Belfast and said the 8 would be killed if Israel tried to retaliate. The group says it boarded the yacht off the Gaza Strip and towed it to a Palestinian base in the Lebanon. So far, the Israelis have made no comment. In the Gulf War, the Iranians have made another missile attack on Baghdad, and a spokesman in the Iraqi capital said 10 men were killed and 106 wounded. The attack came as Arab leaders met in neighboring Jordan for a summit on the war, but it's still undermined by the decision of several prominent leaders to stay away.
That they are meeting at all is an achievement, because unified the Arabs are not. They've been driven together at this emergency summit in Amman by a fear of Iran and its threat to spread its Islamic revolution through the Arab world. But the substance of their summit is not likely to live up to the spectacle. Even as King Hussein, the host, was welcoming heads of state, the cracks were appearing. President Saddam Hussein of Iraq bears the brunt of Iran's wrath as the other protagonist in the Gulf War. He wants his brother Arab's financial and diplomatic backing. But his neighbor, President Hafez al-Assad of Syria, backs Iran. Saudi Arabia bankrolls much of the Arab world and likes to look upon itself as the mediator. But its king is not even with his delegation, annoying the Jordanians and making the 3 days of secret discussions even less likely to achieve anything meaningful. In his opening speech to delegates and in private discussions with them, King Hussein has expressed the belief that the future for the Arabs is bleak unless they can find a way of ending the Gulf War and reaching an accommodation with the Iranians. This summit, believes the king, could well be the last chance the Arabs will have of doing that.
Caspar Weinberger, who only this week resigned as President Reagan's defense secretary, has made a strong attack on the Soviet Union. During a television interview, Mr. Weinberger accused the Russians of seeking world domination, and he described Mr. Gorbachev as unreasonable. 3 Britons are among 10 people missing after their plane disappeared on a flight from Blantyre in Malawi to the capital, Lilongwe. The flight passed over Mozambique, from where it's reported that the plane may have been shot down for violating its airspace. In Sri Lanka, Indian troops have killed 11 Tamil rebels in the northern port of Kankas and Torai. An Indian spokesman said the men had been trying to stop the distribution of Red Cross supplies. Australia have won the Cricket World Cup. In the final in Calcutta, they beat England by just 7 runs. Australia made 253 for 5 in their 50 overs. In reply, England scored 246 for 8.
Australia won the toss, batted and took immediate control. David Boone especially was hard on England's moderate attack. His 75 was to win him the Man of the Match award. He was joined by Dean Jones, who contributed to a second-wicket partnership worth 73. But then Eddie Hemmings prompted a mini-collapse. 3 wickets went for 17 runs, Jones included. Then Alan Border, the Australian captain, steered his side back on course. He put on another 73 with Mike Valletta, who made 45 not out, and it put Australia in a strong position at 253 for 5. It looked even more secure when England lost Tim Robinson for naught in their first over. Mike Gatting took risks as England struggled against the run rate. This was worth 6 runs. War stepped over the boundary. But then the England captain tried cricket's most controversial shot. He was out for 41, on the verge of a big score. So too was Alan Lamb. He made 45. Briefly, the number 8 De Freitas offered hope when all seemed lost. He took England to within 19 runs of the target before trying 1-6 too many. Reed's catch was the last significant moment of the game. It was Australia's first World Cup victory. Humiliated earlier this year at home in 3 one-day tournaments. Now, unexpectedly, they're the world champions.
Rob Bonnet reporting. Now we can go back to that report from Enniskillen. The Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, Sir John Herman, has said that he's satisfied the bomb had been intended to murder civilians. But he said even the terrorists must be shocked by the scale of the carnage today. In Enniskillen tonight, people have been at a church service where prayers have been said for those who died at the War Memorial this morning. This report from John Thorne.
Tonight, in the clinging mist and drizzle of Enniskillen, forensic experts were sifting through the rubble of the explosion. The police say the bomb was designed to murder civilians. It was the spot where onlookers traditionally gathered. 6 of the victims were local Presbyterians, and their congregation gathered this evening only a few yards from the bomb scene for a moving service. Tears were shed as the names of the dead were read out.
We've lost Billy and Nessie Mullen, and Kit and Jessie Johnston.
The explosion has bit deep into the Protestant community of this part of County Fermanagh. One of the survivors of the explosion relived the tragedy.
I was just blown to the ground, and this awful weight just came on the top of us. And I was trapped from my hips downwards, and the face was pushed into the railing with the weight of masonry on the top of it.
The IUC Chief Constable revealed tonight that another IRA bomb planted near a village war memorial close to the border had failed to explode during a wreath-laying ceremony.
No one has accepted responsibility for this bomb in Enniskillen, but I think that even the terrorists, PIRA, will be shocked by the carnage which they wreaked with that bomb.
But the building wasn't searched before the ceremony.
Particularly because that building was only in close proximity to an area where civilians would have mustered.
Tonight, the town of Enniskillen remains numbed by the tragedy. The streets are deserted except for the security forces. They echo only to the generators illuminating the spot where the bomb exploded. The statue of a soldier in mourning on top of the war memorial now stands in tribute and grief for another 11 victims of the terrorism that blights the province.
John Thorne reporting from Enniskillen tonight. Now, more details of that shooting incident in Belfast tonight, which I referred to earlier. 5 Catholic youths have been injured. The shooting incident happened earlier this evening. A group of young people were standing outside a shop on the Antrim Road when a car drew up and fired on them. Police say 5 youths were taken to hospital, but none is believed to be seriously injured. And so, finally, tonight's main story, the bomb believed to have been planted by the IRA, which went off near the War Memorial in Enniskillen. 11 people were killed and 63 were injured, many of them seriously. No warning for the bomb was given. It happened as they gathered to remember the war dead. Tonight, in Enniskillen, prayers have been said in churches near the War Memorial in memory of those who died today. From the newsroom, good night.